Hello, welcome back to another time lapse. I'm sure you're here to see some big, amazing organics. You saw the thumbnail, didn't you? Okay. So I will show you a video, I suppose. So this is a build that has been in the works for quite a few months. It only took me so long because I haven't been working on it consistently, but still, it was a long build to make, probably my longest one to date. For a single organic, that is. So I started off the build with just the basic body shape with a pose that makes it look like it's floating, and that is because we are building a Seraph, which if you don't know what that is, that's a 6-winged angel that you can read about in the Bible. And so I am completely building this based on how the Bible describes it and how other artists depict the seraphs, because we don't really know what they look like. So I just based it off what the Bible says, that they have 6 wings, that they have 2 they fly with, 2 they cover their face with, and 2 they cover their feet with. So that's pretty much all we have to go off of. That plus whatever art you can find online, plus my own imagination. I struggle very much with my figures in that I'm trying to make something look muscular or trying to get the muscles correct. I didn't quite master it here, but that's okay. It was good practice. Not sure what else to say here. With the body done, now we can start adding some clothing, which is actually a little more challenging. How do you dress a seraph? Well, the best way I know how is to give him a robe. No, not a dress. It's a robe. Final answer. Anyway, I wanted his clothing, whatever it is, to be very loose and look very light so that it would fold over a lot. So making all those folds is definitely a little challenging, but the loft tool is definitely a time saver if you're ever doing something like that. Let's go ahead and build a head. I was trying a different method where I actually built out the profile first before doing the first half of it. It works out pretty well. You just can't be too picky because once you rotate it, it's gonna get messed up again anyway. That's okay. It does make it easier for me to see exactly where everything needs to go. And then doing the face itself, this is actually a lot of fun to do, but also very time consuming to try to get it to look just right. And I was also kind of messing around with textures and stuff, just trying to see what I wanted. I'm not the greatest at texturing, but this was definitely good practice. So once I had the textures on the face nailed down, I could do that all over the body. And it's probably still something that I would go back and tweak now, but I've spent long enough on this build, so no, I'm not about to go back and change it. Now to add the wings, all 6 of them, I tried all kinds of methods to make these, starting with trying to map out the shape with loft, then going over that shape by hand to create the feathers. This method, very slow, very meticulous. Whoops, too small, but very slow still. So if you want to go for something that's very, very specific, or you don't want to have to go back to touch it up too much afterwards, then just do it by hand. Because it might save you time, and it might not. Depends on how accurate you can be the first time. Then after I did a couple wings with that method, I did try doing some using the loft to create the feathers first, and then going back and just fixing them. But then by the time I got to the last 2 wings, it was all loft, but still touching up by hand. I love building by hand, and I always touch up by hand. No matter what commands you use, I was just getting very lazy by the end. But of course, it does still take time having to go over it all again by hand to touch it up, but to me, it's absolutely necessary. The brushes cannot do exactly what's in your head. So all of the commands I use for the wings, let me count them. Loft, curve, or spike. I think I use spike more than curve. Spike and loft being both Archeon commands, and then a lot were done by hand too. Now I could have done the entire thing by hand, but after spending 6 hours on a single wing, that's when I realized it's time to speed it up and just start using commands more. So all of those combined, and working on the shaping alone, focusing on the shaping to me is the most important, because if you have all the shaping looking good, despite not having any colors, you're pretty much gonna get a nice build. So I always shape my builds with the idea of how would this look if it didn't get colored at all. Imagine like you're building a statue. You want to make sure all the forms are correct because the forms define the shape even more so than the color would. You can use color to kind of help define shapes, but really you need the form to show that, not just the color. Anyway, that's something I try to do for the most part for my builds, which is one of the reasons they take me so long to get the sculpting stage done, just because I'm trying to make sure that is perfect where it doesn't necessarily need to be colored to look good. So we've modeled everything together, all of the wings and the body, but this doesn't give me much room to go in there and actually see what I'm doing to color them, so we're going to split them apart and color them separately. Now the coloring on this is fairly straightforward. We have wings and we have a robe. It's an angel. Most of it's going to be white or grayscale, so that's fairly easy, but I wanted it to make a nice smooth gradient in all the right sections, so I was using lots of different brushes to brush on the darks and lights, and then using a blending brush to blend the colors together, and then of course going in and touching it up by hand, because brushes do not always do what I want them to do. So it did take me a little bit of time to get the method nailed down where I was actually doing it more efficiently, but once I had it down, I was able to do one wing entirely and then move on to another. Now it's speculated Seraphs might have a fiery-like appearance just because of the word. Something about it meaning fiery one, I believe, I'm not certain, but even if that isn't true, I thought it would look cool, so I am going to set this Seraph on fire. That's why I added the flames, just because it's speculated they might possibly have a fiery appearance. I created the flames by having a duplicate of the wings before I colored them, and on the first set that I didn't color, I replaced around them with a glass block or some kind of block, and then I pasted it onto the colored version. This was just the easiest way I found out to do it. I have no idea if there's a better way. And then I went over that pasted over version and just like used an airbrush to just delete the parts I didn't want, and whatever was left was the fire. And then I used the loft tool plus that airbrush again to create the flames that were kind of coming off of the ends of the wings. Now that the wings are colored, we can move on to our stranger over here and give him some hair and finish coloring his robe, not dress. And the robe is actually pretty straightforward. I just did the same thing I did for the wings, where I painted the darker sections and blended them in, but for the most part I left it a very bright white because I don't want it to blend too much in with the wings. But again, this is where shaping is important. If I hadn't taken so much time to shape it, these colors would have all blended together and looked pretty much the same, but the shapes define the form more than the colors do, as they should. Now with both parts colored, we can just paste them together again, and there is our full organic. Now, the final thing to do is give it something to decorate the atmosphere, if you will, and I didn't really have many ideas for this, so I just did the first random thing that came into my head. Smoke trails, that makes sense. So we'll go ahead and create one of those, and then we'll pop a few more in. Then we'll paste them around. And then we'll make some kind of flooring or a lack of flooring. I don't really know what this is. What would you call this? It's just a crumbling floor. That's all it is. And it looks cool. And I know that's not a very good reason to build something, but at this point I was just ready for this to be done. And thus concludes our Seraph build, but not the video, because we still have to look at it with some shaders where we'll really see these colors and shadows pop out more, plus the 360 render I did at the end. I think I've said enough and there's no more to say, so I'm just gonna stop saying things because there's nothing left to be said. This was my Flaming Seraph build, and I would never want to repeat it. Thank goodness it's done.